Right, let's talk about the title fight this weekend. Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker 2. The rematch takes place in the main event of UFC 271, and I can't wait for this middleweight main event. The two best middleweights in the world by far. I mean, this is what title fights are made for. Israel Adesanya, the last style bender, looks to make his fourth defense of his middleweight world championship against a former middleweight world champion that Israel Adesanya originally took the belt from, Robert Whittaker, number one contender, and may I add, the clear-cut number one contender that arguably shouldn't have even had to have beaten Kelvin Gastelum, because I think he should have got the title shot after beating Jared Cannonier over Marvin Vettori. But you know what? Robert Whittaker beat Darren Till and Jared Cannonier, two top 5 contenders back-to-back, and Marvin Vettori, I guess, was just more deserving of a title contender at the time because, of course, he beat Kevin Holland on a week's notice, just after Kevin Holland a couple of weeks before that had lost to Derek Brunson. I believe he was ranked number 11 in the world or something like that. So clearly, Marvin Vettori deserved the title shot over Robert Whittaker. But Whittaker said, forget it. I'm not going to sit here and complain about everything. I'm going to go out there and earn it against Kelvin Gastelum. Originally supposed to be Paulo Costa. But what can you do? Kelvin Gastelum steps up on short notice again for another middleweight main event. Thank you, Kelvin Gastelum. You sacrificed your own career for us fans. I really do appreciate Kelvin Gastelum now you look back at things, because there's so many middleweight fights that might have never happened without Kelvin Gastelum coming to the rescue and saving the day. And I'll be honest, I'm kind of glad the way things have worked out. I know I just complained about Marvin Vettori getting a rematch against Adesanya over Robert Whittaker when Whittaker beat Cannonier, but after the Cannonier fight, I don't think I'd be as hyped for Whittaker versus Adesanya 2 as I am right now, because watching him destroy Kelvin Gastelum, and not just destroy Kelvin Gastelum, violates Kelvin Gastelum for 25 minutes, 50-45, no chance for Gastelum whatsoever. I mean, he might have had a couple of clean shots that landed on Robert Whittaker, but there was very, very few moments of success in that entire fight for Kelvin Gastelum, and that made me really way more excited for this rematch against Israel Adesanya, because of course, Israel Adesanya's toughest fight in the middleweight division was against Kelvin Gastelum. They went tooth and nail, it was a massive war back and forth, and you watch Whittaker completely dismantle the same guy that took Israel Adesanya to the very limit of his career, and it kind of makes you wonder, can Whittaker beat Israel Adesanya now? If Whittaker can't beat Israel Adesanya, I don't see anyone beating Israel Adesanya for a very long time in the middleweight division, unless maybe like an Andre Muniz or a Nassourdine Imavov makes their way to the top and just uses their very strong grappling game or something like that. But as of right now, in the top 5, top 6, top 7 of the middleweight division, none of them really have a chance outside of Robert Whittaker. So if Whittaker can't win, you might be stuck with Adesanya as champ for a very long time in the middleweight division, which isn't even that bad because he's a big star, he sells a lot of pay-per-views, and I'm looking forward to this matchup massively. But I do want to add this. It's sort of like the Usman versus Covington situation where, you know, Covington gave him his toughest fight and they have the rematch, but in this case, Whittaker actually earned the rematch against Israel Adesanya by beating 3 contenders in a row. He lost the first fight, of course. Let's talk about that one, because I feel like some people really don't understand what truly happened in that first fight between them. I know Israel Adesanya won by second round TKO, but arguably, it was one of the more competitive Israel Adesanya fights throughout the entire fight until it was over. I mean, in the first round, that round goes either way, in all honesty. Maybe Whittaker could be winning that first round before Israel Adesanya drops him with like 2 seconds to go at the end of that round. Then Whittaker comes out in the second round after being concussed, switches back on, and again, arguably could be slightly ahead of Israel Adesanya in that second round before getting hit by that key shot. But again, as I just said, it's the key shots that matter, and Israel Adesanya waited for his moment, found the key shots to shut the lights out on Robert Whittaker and put him away to win the middleweight world championship, and now we've got the rematch. But I do want to mention that, just to clear it off right now and say, it wasn't a domination in the first fight just because Israel Adesanya finished him. Marvin Vettori did worse against Israel Adesanya in their rematch than Whittaker did against Adesanya in the first fight, even though Marvin Vettori made it to a decision. The matter in which someone loses is not a determining factor over how the fight went. Whittaker and Adesanya had a very competitive battle on the feet for as long as that fight lasted, until Israel Adesanya landed the key blows and put down Robert Whittaker with those left hooks, and that really did change the scenario of the fight. He finished it in the second round brutally. Since then, he's beaten Paulo Costa in one of his most impressive performances of his entire career. Then tried to move up against Jan Blachowicz. It failed. Jan Blachowicz took him down, out-grappled him, and I would say outstruck him for early 2 rounds. I thought Jan Blachowicz won the first round on the feet. I know a lot of people don't believe that, but I have eyes, and I watched the fight happen, and I'm not biased towards Israel Adesanya, so I saw Jan Blachowicz win the first round on the feet against Israel Adesanya. I saw him win the second round on the feet against Israel Adesanya. Adesanya won the third round on the feet and started to look good in the fourth, but then Jan Blachowicz utilised his grappling, ended up on top, and dominated those last 2 rounds using his grappling and his top control, and some damaging blows from half guard on top as well. But since then, Israel Adesanya came back down to the middleweight division, got a win against Marvin Vettori, readjusted himself to middleweight, refocused himself with that win over Vettori because it was kind of like a cruise control win for Israel Adesanya. The fight was mainly made, and I know I just ranted about it earlier, but I'm going to talk about it again. The fight was mainly made because Marvin Vettori is a personality. He has high levels of autism, and that can sell an entertaining press conference for a pay-per-view card that Israel Adesanya's on. And also, of course, they went to a split decision the first time, and that shouldn't have been a split decision. But in Israel Adesanya's case, he doesn't want to be seen as a guy who won a split decision over someone. He'd rather be seen as a guy who just won outright, and that's what he did in the rematch against Marvin Vettori. 50-45 on all the judges' scorecards, and it was a very impressive performance. He didn't take any damage whatsoever. He's getting right back in there against Robert Whittaker. There's a bit of a layoff here, though, to be fair. I don't even remember when he took on Marvin Vettori, but it was a very long time ago. Both guys have been out of the cage for a very long time, but I think we're going to see the best versions of both of these fighters, and I think Israel Adesanya is going to win this rematch. I really do believe Israel Adesanya is going to win this rematch, because a lot of people are looking at what Whittaker did to Kelvin Gastelum and saying he's going to look way better against Israel Adesanya. Do I believe Whittaker's gotten better since the first fight against Israel Adesanya? Yes. Do I believe Israel Adesanya has gotten better since the first fight against Robert Whittaker? Yes. He's got a whole breast better, and we'll talk about that at the end of the video. But he has got way better, technically, and also defensively in his grappling since that first fight against Whittaker. So a lot of people are sort of judging this on, you know, Whittaker's going to win. Did you see how he looked against Kelvin Gastelum? Gastelum is a mini fridge of a man. He's literally a Mexican mini fridge of a man in that middleweight division with no reach whatsoever, and he comes forward reckless looking for big bombs. That's Whittaker's fucking favourite style of fight. You want to come forward and throw bombs at him? He's going to pick you apart at range. Jacare Souza was one of his easier fights in his career before that one, and it was because Jacare Souza put his head down, tried some takedowns here and there, but just swung bombs at Robert Whittaker, and Whittaker was in and out, landing big shots on him, cracking him over the top, landed that head kick obviously at the end as well. And I think it's just that style matchup for Whittaker, where you've got these guys that are looking to come forward and crash into him, that he really likes. But when you put someone who's a striker on the outside against Robert Whittaker, it's a completely different story. So I don't believe, although it was an amazing performance against Kelvin Gastelum, I don't believe you can look too much into that when it comes to how he's going to do against Israel Adesanya. We saw when Whittaker fought Darren Till and Jared Cannonier how much closer those fights can be, just because those fighters aren't crashing forward looking to close the distance. They're in fact staying at range and playing a striking battle with Robert Whittaker on the feet. Darren Till fight was very close. Whittaker edged out the rounds that he needed to win. I thought he won that fight 4 rounds to 1. Best case scenario for Darren Till, 3 rounds to 2 to Robert Whittaker. There's no way Darren Till wins. Whittaker won that fight very clearly, outpointing Darren Till on the feet and getting takedowns where he needed them as well. And against Jared Cannonier, very competitive fight, but Whittaker edged out the rounds that he needed to. Got the knockdown in the 3rd round and hurt him bad, but then of course Cannonier came back and cracked Whittaker on the chin badly. Rocked him quite badly at the end of the 3rd round, but of course knocked down over someone getting rocked. Whittaker wins that fight very clearly against Jared Cannonier as well. I just feel like you can't really judge this rematch based on that Gastelum performance, because I even said, you can go back and watch my prediction for Whittaker versus Gastelum. I said this is going to be the best performance of Robert Whittaker's career. Perfect matchup for him. I even said this in the first fight they were supposed to have. I believe it was at UFC 234, where Israel Adesanya beat Anderson Silva. He was supposed to be in the co-main event against Anderson Silva, and Whittaker versus Gastelum was actually supposed to be the main event of that card. I was saying that Whittaker's going to destroy him, dismantle him. I said he was going to get a head kick KO with that 1-2 head kick combo. He almost did, but of course Gastelum's fucking granite anvil head refuses to allow him to be KO'd, so you just can't do it no matter who you are and who you think you are. So it's going to be a decision loss if Gastelum does lose, but Whittaker's got a really good chance in beating Israel Adesanya by mixing in his grappling, by landing some decent shots on the feet. I just don't think it's going to be enough. I don't think it's going to be enough for him. So I'm going to go with Israel Adesanya, but I'm going to go with Israel Adesanya by decision, because I think a mistake that Whittaker made in the first fight was being over-aggressive. I do believe he needs to be aggressive, and first, he needs to go first here. He's got a big reach disadvantage. Adesanya's got a leg reach advantage as well, which is big for him because he's such a style bender that he sits on the outside and spams leg kicks until his opponent can't walk, and then he comes into range and starts landing the big shots that he needs to. I just don't believe that Whittaker has the style to beat Israel Adesanya. Sure, he can grapple a little bit, but listen, Israel Adesanya's got really good grappling at this point in his career. Marvin Vettori couldn't keep him down. The only time Vettori even got him down officially in that fight was when he caught a kick of Israel Adesanya and took him down from there as Adesanya fell backwards. Then he had the back of Israel Adesanya without hooks in or without a body triangle, because middleweights are fucking spasticated and retarded, so they just don't put body triangles in, and he was cranking on the face of Israel, and Israel turned around in the back mount position, ended up on top, stood himself back up, and just basically toyed with Vettori for the rest of that fight on the feet, barely outlanding him in most of the rounds, doing just enough to win, basically. It was a cruise control fight for Israel Adesanya. He's improved his grappling, man. And Robert Whittaker is not the size of Jan Blachowicz. That's just the reality of the situation. Whittaker is the size of a welterweight. He used to be a welterweight. He's now filled himself out a little bit for the middleweight division, but he's not a middleweight framed man. You know what I'm saying? He's not a big guy who's going to be able to catch Israel Adesanya at range. So I think Adesanya's going to play the same game. Whittaker's maybe going to start finishing his combos with leg kicks, which I think is something that you've got to do against Israel Adesanya. Adesanya leans back. Whittaker, I believe, could maybe throw like a 1-2, fake that he's going to lunge, and then chop at the legs afterwards at the end of his combination whenever Adesanya leans back. Or maybe I believe Whittaker could try to use his body lock takedowns, sort him against Kelvin Gastelum. We've seen him in a couple of fights in his career, even against Darren Till as well. He rarely shoots like a double leg or a single leg. He'll get a body lock, go for a sweep, go for a trip, end up on top in half guard or side control. That's typically what Whittaker wants to do. I just don't think it's going to work on Israel Adesanya. I don't think it is. And I've saved this till the end. He's on fucking roids, man. There's like nothing there. I've danced around it with all the other reasons I can think of as to why Whittaker won't beat Adesanya, but reality is, dude grew a fucking breast. One side. Massive breast out of nowhere. People say gyno happens naturally. Gyno happens naturally when you're morbidly obese, going through puberty, or it starts with a little bit of puffiness and gets worse and worse. Israel Adesanya is not going through puberty, although he is into anime, so you would maybe like sort of think that he's within that age group. He is nowhere near puberty. He's a peak conditioned athlete that stays in shape year long, all around the year, stays in perfect condition, fighting often. He was one of the most active fighters before he won the belt in the entire UFC organization. I think it was one of the fastest rises to a title in UFC history or something like that. Pretty ridiculous, outside of some bullshit like Nico Montano, you know what I'm saying? But Israel Adesanya, very active, not obese, professional athlete, stays in shape, and a massive C-cup breast grew out of nowhere. And it's kind of annoying that we just kind of have to accept that at this point, but we just kind of have to accept it. Dude's on the sauce. He just put a post out, I believe, on Twitter saying, you can copy the recipe, but you'll never have the sauce. Damn right we won't have the sauce. We don't have your fucking chemist, Israel Adesanya. Okay? We need to get a hold of that chemist and juice up Whittaker and some of these other contenders with the same thing. He grew a breast. And not only did he grow a breast, he gained power at the same time as growing the breast. The Whittaker fight, yeah, was the fight just before Israel Adesanya grew the breast, okay? It was his first real KO of his entire career against the toughest opponent he had ever taken on in Robert Whittaker. Of course, you could say perfect shot this and perfect shot that. Go and watch Israel Adesanya's debut, I believe against Rob Wilkinson, maybe at UFC... I don't even know what card it would have been. UFC 221 is in my fucking head vaguely. I don't think that's what it was though. But maybe that could be it. It was in Australia, I remember. And he beat Rob Wilkinson. Go and look at the power of this fucking guy's punches in that fight. And the power of his punches in every single fight leading up to that Whittaker one. It was not the same. He grows a breast. He's not going through puberty. It's on one side. It's a C-cup out of nowhere. It just so happens to be perfectly timed with when the world goes into a global fucking catastrophe just before the Romero fight. Remember, that Romero fight was in March of 2020. That's when this whole thing kind of kicked off. Like, you know what I mean? That whole thing was going on. Maybe the supply line gets shut down from China to Oceania. He doesn't get his shipment into New Zealand. And on the most remote island on Earth, Israel Adesanya, the skinny 30-year-old that's in peak condition his entire life, randomly grows a C-cup breast on one side. And not only does he grow a C-cup breast on one side, it's like fluctuating. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like a bit of a puffy nipple. It was a full breast, and then it went to sort of a puffiness, and then it went back to a full breast, and then it came back to a puffiness. Like, something's going on there, guys. And it annoys me, really. I know I'm laughing about it, but it does fucking annoy me that this is the condition of the sport right now, where we just got these roid cheats faking a legacy that they don't fucking deserve because they're on the fucking sauce, and some of these other contenders can't afford the same sauce that Israel Adesanya can. But, you know, gotta fucking deal with it. So if Whittaker's gonna try and go for a takedown, Adesanya's defending a takedown. Not only defending a takedown, he's defending a takedown on roids. You know what I'm saying? Usman has so many attributes of a roid user. I made a whole video on my channel. It's one of my most viewed videos on my entire channel because people really agreed with it, I guess, where I broke down how I think Usman's on roids. More Plates, More Dates did that as well. You also did one on Israel Adesanya. Is it any fucking coincidence? If John Jones was still an active fighter, he'd be number 1 pound for pound. Usman would be number 2 pound for pound. And Adesanya would be number 3 pound for pound. Is it any fucking coincidence how the only fighters who have any kind of roid weirdness going on in their career just so happen to be the best fighters in their fucking division by far? Only them. No one else really has that level of gyno. Sometimes you'll see a puffy nip here or there. Very rarely. But the best middleweight in the world by far has got gyno. The biggest gyno you've seen in UFC history. I don't remember seeing gyno back in the day. But nowadays, Israel Adesanya, biggest gyno example, high-profile situation we've ever seen in UFC history. Just so happens to be the best middleweight in the world by far. Kamaru Usman, all of the fucking red flags you could muster to try and say someone's on roids. Just so happens to be pound for pound number 1 and the best in his division by far. John Jones, best fighter in the sport outside of steroid conversations, because of course those steroid problems that he had does remove him from that GOAT conversation. But without those positive tests, he would be the GOAT of the sport, undoubtedly. The only guy with pulsing picograms in his system. Like, it's just obvious. So, fucking deal with it, guys. Get a chemist or don't fucking bother, I guess. Hopefully Whittaker wins. Get this roid cheat out of the fucking sport. But, I think Adesanya's got this one in the bag by decision. I reckon he wins this one 3 rounds to 2, 4 rounds to 1. I think Whittaker's got to use those body lock takedowns after lunging in. Duck under the counters of Israel Adesanya. Go for that body lock. Try and get a sweep. I just don't see him keeping Israel Adesanya there. Adesanya's got very long limbs. And I think Whittaker's just going to fall into the same traps. But this time I think he's going to be a little bit more hesitant about it. A little bit more cautious. A little bit less aggressive with his lunges. And I don't think he's going to get KO'd. But I can see him getting dropped twice and winning a round. I'll say 49-46 Israel Adesanya. Whittaker might be doing well in some rounds until he gets dropped. Other than that, I think that Adesanya's going to win on the feet at range, chopping at the legs at range, landing good shots. But if Whittaker starts jabbing his face off, jabs are Israel Adesanya's weakness, in all honesty. I know you wouldn't think that based on his fucking breast that's growing from him, but you don't like jabs. From fists, I guess. Jabs from needles, different situation. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Click that button up there. Toodle pip, I'll see you later. Call me salty all you want. You know I'm fucking right. I don't give a fuck.